Hello YouTube. I just wanted to touch base with a few inquiries that I've had about our leaf shelters. I'm not going to go through step by step on how to build one. All I'm going to do is go through a few key points and my views about the importance of leaf shelters and their uses. Before I go into the elements of a leaf shelter, I just want to point out a few things. I think a leaf shelter covers 4 of our primary needs. Number 1, it stops us from getting wet when it's raining. Number 2, it gets us out of the wind. And number 3, it creates a micro environment. All of those 3 together with a fire in front means that you can be very comfortable inside a shelter like this. The thatching on the top acts like a duvet, so you'd be surprised just how warm it can actually get inside this shelter. Quite often on our courses, people build a big fire thinking that they actually need it. But what actually happens after about half an hour, 45 minutes, they're actually starting to get too hot in the shelter. What they don't realise is the heat that is radiating from the fire actually warms this up, creating the perfect micro environment for somebody to be quite comfortable in. The 4th element is, I think, very important. A shelter actually gives you a sense of place, a sense of being. Once you've actually got yourself a shelter and a fire in front, you have created your space. In a survival situation, that is uplifting for the soul. All of a sudden, you start to think to yourself, this dire situation isn't so dire. I can actually survive this. I can actually walk away from here and actually be able to tell the tale. So, when you take those 4 points, a leaf shelter can make all the difference in any environment. This shelter here was built by 5 women who attended one of our survival courses. There was a few things that I pointed out to them, and I'm going to share that with you now. One of the important things about a leaf shelter is making sure that your main ridgepole is a sturdy piece of wood. There is nothing worse than piling a load of leaf litter onto a shelter and then halfway through it crack. That snaps and you have to start all over again. However, this one is a very good ridgepole. But to be on the safe side, I encourage them to put an upright forked stick in just to support the weight. It's not going to affect the shelter in any way, but it's just that extra belts and braces security on the ridgepole. Another thing that I pointed out to them was these sticks that you see sticking out. When it rains, the rain hits the stick, it runs around the stick, along the underside of the stick, and it drips down inside the shelter. So by the end of the evening, you actually got raindrops hitting you in the head when you're trying to sleep. The trick is to keep these cut back. Now if you can't cut them back, cover them over with the leaf litter. As you can see here, the ridgepole is there, but the leaf litter is right up to the end. Any rain hitting here is just going to drip straight down. It's not going to run along the underside of these poles. Another important thing is thatching. The thatching does need to be as thick as you can make it. Ideally, no less than 12 to 15 inches in thickness. The more you can get on, the warmer and the drier you will be. I'm going to show you a couple of shelters that we built over a year ago and they are still standing now. Okay, last year I added a little bit more leaf litter, but it only took about 10 minutes to do that job. If you build a good frame and a good sturdy shelter, they can last you year after year. This is one of the first shelters that we built in this woodland when we started running the survival courses in this location. As you can see, it's a standard lean-to shelter. The actual ridgepole of this is actually still alive, as you can see from the growth and the leaves that are growing from it. It naturally bent over, obviously, in the wind, but I was happy to carry on using it. I knew that the wood was going to stay sound and sturdy. That's been almost 2 years now that I built this shelter. As you can see from over here, it definitely needs a little bit more thatching. The actual thatching itself is slowly starting to slide down, so all you need to do is just keep adding new material to the very top just to bulk it out again. However, it still works very fine. It's still bone dry inside, and we've had a lot of rain recently. The thatching on the back of this one is, like I say, nearly 2 years old, and it's starting to become more compressed and more solid, so it's becoming more of a solid back. This one is excellent when you've got a small fire in front. All that heat comes in and it just sits here. Predominantly the wind blows from behind me and it always blows that way. so the smoke from the fire does tend to blow out of the shelter, so we don't get smoked inside this one. But inside here becomes a lovely warm environment, and it's not uncommon in the winter to find any student sitting here in front of the fire when they're having their lunch. Another important aspect about lean-to shelters is the angle of these poles. If you have them too shallow, the rain hits and comes straight through. If you have it too steep, it doesn't give you very much of a shelter in the bottom. The trick is to get enough that you get a shelter, but steep enough that when the rain hits, it runs and wants to run along the leaves. And that is the crucial point. If you can get that angle right, then you'll be dry and you will actually have a decent sized living space. This shelter here can accommodate 2 occupants in a sleeping position. So I think we've got this one just right. And this one is a standard A-frame. This is my favourite. You don't need cordage in order to make a shelter. This shelter here has 3 main components to the structure. A sturdy ridgepole, like all shelters, are necessary with this one. And the ridgepole needs to be at least 1.5 times the length of your body. The other 2 components are these 2 sticks here. They're just simple forked sticks with the ridgepole hooked in the fork. With 2 of them coming together creates a locked system. This is a sturdy shelter. It's not going to fall over. This one is about 12 to 18 months old now, and a gentleman of 6'4" actually got into this, and he actually was able to fit nice and comfortably inside, and he actually spent a night in there. He actually said that if he had to build a shelter himself, this is the option that he would go for. These are excellent shelters, the fact that they are small. The environment inside tapers nearer to where you put your feet, so your head would be at this end. By being a small environment, your body heat warms it up very efficiently. There's not really a need for a fire in front of this one. The aperture on this shelter is quite small, so not a lot of heat will get in there. But if you didn't want to have a fire, this one would be more than enough to keep you comfortable, even on the coldest of nights. Your body heat will actually be trapped inside. As with the thatching, if you got the thatching right, it's a duvet, and the heat radiating from your body will warm that environment up. Being out of the wind means that the wind's not going to draw all that heat away, so you actually lay in a very warm environment. So there's not really a need for a sleeping bag in a shelter like this. Another important thing about leaf shelters is these branches here. Once you've covered the whole shelter with leaves and debris, lay some branches on the top. As you can see, these are forked pointing downwards. They will dig in and they will hold in place. What this does, it stops the wind from blowing these leaves off the shelter in the course of the night. By laying a few branches over the shelter will actually enable your shelter to be able to withstand strong winds. Another very important aspect, just as I mentioned on the original shelter, was these poles here. If you got them sticking out through the thatch, again the rain will hit them and run along the underside, causing them to drip inside the shelter. Make sure that any of these sticks that you lay up against the side are buried underneath the thatching. That means make sure the thatching goes over all the ends along the backbone of this shelter, making that solid as one big thatched roof. You won't get any rain getting in at all. You may get a little bit of dripping around the front here, but as long as you tuck yourself inside, you will remain bone dry overnight. All these shelters require one other element, and that is something between you and the ground. The ground itself will actually suck the body heat from your body. Not only that, but you'll be sore and tossing and turning all night long. So getting as many ferns, grasses, reeds, anything you can use to create a nice cushion below you will stop the ground from actually sucking the heat from you, and it will actually give you a comfortable duvet so you sleep well at night. A shelter like this can last you year after year, and all you need to do at the end of each year is gather up any fallen leaves and add it to the thatching. If it starts to rain, even though your leaves are bone dry, they will shed water, but you need to bear that in mind. Once you've got wet leaves, those leaves become 3 times heavier. So the importance of a sturdy ridgepole can't be underestimated, because although the leaves go on dry, It only takes a heavy downpour and all of a sudden you've got 3 times as much weight on the top. And it's not something to be woken up to in the morning. There is no definitive design about building one of these leaf shelters. Obviously, as I pointed out, there are a few key points that you need to bear in mind when you do build them. On a safety note, these shelters I leave built permanently. I can do that because we always use this woodland and we're always running courses, and it wouldn't be efficient for us to keep taking these down and then rebuilding them for each course. However, in any situation, shelters like this should be dismantled immediately after use. Quite often I go for walks around the countryside and I see half-baked attempt at somebody building a shelter. It's quite often just a pile of woods waiting to trap a poor animal or to cause a damage or injury or even death to young children that run off into the woods when they're out walking with their parents. So if you're going to have a go at building shelters like this, please do take them down, do make the ground as you left it. And if you're going to spend a night in there, enjoy them, make the most of them. They take a lot of work to build. It's one thing to read a book and it's one thing to watch a YouTube channel on building shelters, but it's a completely different attitude when you get out into the woodland. What you think you know, all of a sudden you relearn new lessons. I'm always learning. I build shelters and they never look the same. I've never built a shelter the same way in 2 different locations. The environment, the materials and even the weather will dictate the type of shelter that I build. You've got to also think about a survival situation. How much energy and resources do you have to build a shelter like this? Do you have food? Do you have water? To build a shelter like this exerts a lot of energy, and unless you can replenish that energy, you seriously need to ask yourself, is there an easier way to find shelter? I hope this video has been of help to anybody, and again, go out, have a go, build the shelters, but please do tidy up the woodlands after yourself. And if you do any great videos, post me a link, show me some pictures, I'd love to see them. Until then, keep safe in the woods and enjoy the countryside.